Well, happy Sabbath to you all. Welcome to the Zanoff family. So that's who you're connected to, Dion. Eh? Good for you. I think you're connected to a good vine. God bless you. Yes, thank you for coming along today. Today is a very special day in the life of Dion, but it's not only a special day in his life, it's a special day in your life because he's part of your family too. So thank you, Alstonville Church, for coming together to worship God on his day, but to worship with one another. Have you ever been in a situation where you wished somebody wouldn't do or say something because it would embarrass you and make you say, oh, I wish I never knew that person? Well, sometimes those incidents happen and sometimes you have no control over them. I remember our son was only about 3 years old. And on his first birthday, my father had brought him a very special teddy bear. They basically went out of production after that year, and it was a very well-known teddy bear all around the world. And so our son learned at a very young age to cherish that teddy bear. But it went everywhere with him. Went in the pushchair, went shopping, it went everywhere. Now, when we were living in Port Pirie, one day Maisel wandered into town, Matthew in the pushchair, and I think Liam might have been in the pram, Matt might have been walking, and he had the teddy bear with him. But when he got home, he didn't have the teddy bear. It had been lost. And of course, he was deeply distressed. A few days later, back to town, they go into the post office and Matthew looks up and there's a teddy bear that he knew was his up there on that shelf. So he let them know that they had his teddy bear. And he thought they'd stolen it, but he had lost it. Well, I'll tell you what, at that moment I wasn't there, but Maisel wanted to hide because Matthew gave that teddy bear a telling off like you wouldn't believe. And it went on, and Maisel's getting more embarrassed. This is my kid. A little later, Leah was only a little thing. And you have Plunket in New Zealand, and here in Australia you have mothers and babies. It was back then a long time ago. And so Maisel had to take little Leah to mothers and babies, and of course she had to take Matthew with her. Now, at this point, he's about 3.5 years old. And as they walk into the door, they come to this desk where Maisel had to fill a form. And Matthew looked up at this lady and looked at her and said, "What are you doing here? You haven't got any milk in your Charlies." And the dear lady looked at Matthew and said, "I hope not, I'm a grandmother." Well, again, Maisel wanted the ground to open up and swallow her. Where he got that phrase from, we have no idea. He wasn't even watching television. There was no internet. There was no I have no idea. But Maisel, I got home from work and Maisel told me, and I'll tell you what. And so quite often those things happen. Stuff happens and all of a sudden we feel embarrassed. But sometimes stuff happens that we also then feel shame and guilt because of what someone else does, because of the connection that we have with them. Well, I want to take you to a story in the Bible, and this is particularly for Dion today, where we meet a person who is comfortable with shame and comfortable with guilt. I want to spend a little time with you this morning in the story of the lost son, the prodigal son. And here in Luke chapter 15, we're introduced to this parable that Jesus taught. And we're excited today because Dion is represented in the story, but represented in a good way. A good way because he's come home. He's come home. He's been on a journey. He's been baptised before. But as we started going to the home and started sharing the gospel with Ikeo and the family, Dion then starts to say, well, look, I need to be rebaptised because I went on a journey. I made some choices, I made some decisions, and I wandered away. Now, during our little study time, Ikeo also said to me, Pastor, how can I love someone I can't see? Well, Ikeo, it's in the story where you will get to meet that someone that you've been challenged to love that you can't see, because it's in this story we have the greatest ever expression of the love of God. And so let's just pick up the story for a moment. Let's pick up the story. Verse 11, then he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and then wasted his possessions with prodigal living, wild living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in the land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and then no one gave him anything. But when he had come to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose, and he came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and did something. He did what was shameful, what was embarrassing to those all around him. It says he ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. This fatted calf, this was not just any ordinary calf. This was an animal that had now been pre-selected to be fattened up for a special feast. It was already designated to be used for some other special event. And now you've got the son returning, and you've got the father now ordering the killing of this animal that was already set aside for another event, but now gets used for the celebration of a returning son. And then it goes on, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to be merry. It's a happy time. It's a good time when someone comes home. I can remember my younger brother. He was 10. He had been a ratbag. He'd been rather naughty. And it was the first time I ever saw my mother get mad. In all of my life, I never saw Mum get mad, other than on this occasion. And he wouldn't take the disciplining of my mother, so my mother sent him to bed. at about 11 o'clock in the morning. It's not a good time for a boy to go to bed. But at 11 o'clock in the morning, he is sent to bed, and he goes to bed, and Mum comes in, tells him, well, look, you got to behave yourself. And he's kept on carrying on, and so she just reached down, picked up the side of the bed and went flick. Next thing, my brother is under the bed, under the mattress, and the bed is on top of him. He crawled out of there, and he says, oh, I hate you. You're not nice to me. And so he packed the bag, and I think Mum even helped him pack the bag, and he ran away. Well, I knew exactly where he would be. I knew exactly what tree he would be sitting up. And I kept on saying, Mum, do you want me to go and get him? No. He'll come to his senses. Well, sure enough, when the stomach got hungry, he came to his senses and he came back. And I can remember Mum just saying, well, hope you had a nice day, son. He was expecting something very different. But the way that she treated him told him that she loved him. Even though she had to do what she did, she just loved him. And here we have a father doing the exact same thing. The father here was entitled to much discipline, but he doesn't discipline. Instead, he disciplines not in the way that we think he would, but in a very, very special way. Now, of course, in the story, we're told that now his oldest son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of his servants and asked what these things meant, and he said to him, your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. And he was angry and would not go in, therefore his father came out. So he answered and said to his father, lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat, that I may make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours, not my brother, it's a great tragedy when we distance ourselves. And here these two brothers, same father, get to the point where they distance themselves from one another. And with this young brother returning home, the old brother wants to have nothing to do with him. Had felt that an injustice had been done. And he lets his father know, and he becomes bitter, he becomes twisted as a result of it. Verse 31, and he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. So there's the story. That's the way that Jesus told the story. But when you understand the culture, there's some powerful things happening here. In the culture of these people at this time, it was severely frowned upon if an old man lifted the hem of his garment and started to run. That's not what old men do. As they have researched this, they have found that in earthquakes in these countries, most of the old men die because they won't run. They won't flee. The culture is so deep, and the act of shame coming upon one who shows his ankles and runs, it's a disgrace to the family. But this old man, he's not worried about what other people think. He's been looking. As we read and we study this old man has been looking for the return of his son. But you need to understand that what that son did was wrong. And when he turned up to his father and he says, Father, you know what? When you die, Father, you're going to give me my inheritance. Or when you die, I'm going to receive my inheritance. That's what I'm entitled to. But Father, I want you to die now. I want you to die now, Father. I don't want to wait till you die. I want you to die now. And so by that son asking the father to give him an inheritance, he is essentially saying, Father, you are now dead to me. I want what is mine. And in the culture, that father was now a walking dead person. For he had surrendered his inheritance to the son. And the father had to continue to live with that shame of being a walking dead person. And he does. He lives with that shame. But he still wants that son to come home. I'll tell you what, no child of Jesus can ever do enough to separate themselves from the love of Jesus. No one can. Dion, while you're out there doing what you were doing, God still loved you. He loved you to the nth degree, and he kept on loving you. And the more you decided, well, hey, I want to do this and I want to do that, God was there. And he waited. He waited. God waited. And as he waits, he looks and he sees that son coming. He sees that son coming. And he puts all thoughts aside of himself. And he rises up. And he runs to meet his son. And this is where some of the most beautiful stuff happens. When that son left his father's household to go on his journey of exploration and self-fulfillment and you name it, whatever you want to describe it, experimenting, whatever it was. As the son left the father, he left with great wealth. He left in great clothes. He would have left with a ring on his finger, which would have identified him to the family and clearly shown that he was part of family. He had all of that. But in his wanderings, he loses all of that. He got to the point where he would have even sold his ring. In desperation, he would have sold his ring of belonging to find another meal. He was so desperate. But he was so desperate that he also started to feed the swine. And at the time of him coming to his father, and as he's wandering, and the boy, instead of getting faster, is getting slower, because the closer he got to home, the more he felt the burden of his sin. And the son only wanted to return as a servant. He didn't ever think he would be able to return as a son. So the boy, as he comes, continues to think, well, what am I going to say to my dad? How am I going to explain my behavior to my father? I'll tell you what, good dads are not interested in that stuff. Good dads are not interested in that. God's not interested in that. God's not worried about what you did. He's just worried in you. And so as the father comes, as the father gets closest to the boy, he could see his rags. He could even smell the pigs. And what does he do? He takes away that embarrassment from his son. God's not embarrassed with who we are. God's not embarrassed about what we have done. He loves us to bits. And to hide the young man's nakedness, to remove the young man's embarrassment, he embarrasses himself by having his cloak, his best cloak, cover the filthy rags of that young man. And there we start to see the lovely demonstration of this God who loves beyond all measure. And so he puts a coat on. And now the young man no longer has to worry as he moves into the public domain of his family, because he's covered with the Father's robe. But then he does more than that. He's not only wanting to cover our nakedness, our uncleanness, our dirtiness, our sinfulness. He not only wants to remove that shame of who we have become, but he wants us to belong with him. So then what does he do? He gets a signet ring. He gets a signet ring. And he gives that and he puts that on the son's finger. Hey, son. Yeah, you belong to me. You've returned. You belong to this family. But remember, the son only wanted to return as a slave. And the father at this point does something amazing. Something amazing. He takes a pair of sandals and he gives them to the young man. And the young man puts them on his feet. Just that one expression says, son, young man, you're never going to be a servant in my household. You're going to be my son. You can walk proud. You can walk tall. You don't have to go around bare feet anymore. You are one who belongs in the household of God. What a beautiful thing.